All right, welcome to Unschooled Theology. I'm one of your hosts, Derick, and with me today is Evan. Good day, sir.
Good day to you, sir.
All right. So for this
Wait.
episode,
I'm gonna start with a terrible joke.
oh boy,
It has to do with the topic that we're working on today. How does Jesus make his coffee? He brews it.
wow, well done.
This is terrible. I saw it
Oh
on a
boy,
meme once.
oh boy. All right. Yeah. So on that note, a quick. It's not really a topic. I don't know that this episode has a topic. It's just a couple small things. Um, the so I do want to mention Hebrew real quick because I had started down the path of potentially trying to learn some Hebrew. And then I realized there's a lot of contention on what some of these words mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it is not like learning Spanish, right? Where we have people who speak Spanish in their life, and so we can generally get a very good idea of how
What
these
something means.
languages align with each other. Yes.
Yeah.
With ancient Hebrew, that's not really the case. So there is some debate over what is the right, translation of this or that word. And that exists in the Greek too, as well, but probably more so in the Hebrew. It sort of makes sense. The further you go back, the less clarity we would have. That sort of stands to reason. So there's a reason I'm holding off. That's because if I were to learn it, then I would have my own ideas about what the right word is, the right way to translate it. Whereas I think actually the debate over it might lead to more insight than me sort of having developed my own ideas. I would rather look and see what a few different people are saying, because let's be honest, odds are none of them have it right exactly. Odds are the truth is somewhere in the middle of all this. And so by not having my own ideas about what is the right translation, I'm a little more free to look at the different debates and try and see what is the thing that, what might sort of fit in the middle of all of this that we could extract. And maybe it is a little bit of this and a little bit of that is the right way to think about what a verse is saying or what a passage is saying or what a word means. So I figured I'd throw that out there just to say this is I mentioned going down that path, and I stopped pretty quickly because I had this sort of realization that there's probably more benefit actually from becoming aware of the debate rather than having a side in the debate.
The only issue that you run into is that it's hard to weigh evidence for particular viewpoints. That's the only hazard you run into.
Well, the thing that becomes the way you weigh it, this is what I discovered because I thought that through, is the context. So it becomes, here's what everything around this is saying. Here's the way we've talked about or thought about the things around it. So now what around the sort of debate of this, what sort of really fits here? So you are making a decision not based on the mechanics of that particular thing, but you're really looking at the hole that this thing is trying to fill and then asking, okay, what is the way in which it's filling this hole? If that makes sense.
That's fair. I think it's an effective way of getting at understanding. I think resources are so available currently for understanding multiple interpretations of a given word that it's not it's not entirely necessary to have an intimate understanding of an ancient language in order to get a grip on the debate. I think that's a big benefit, because I think there was a time and place where aside from having a whole library and the ease or familiarity with the books in that library to find multiple different people's interpretation of something. Um, that it required a ridiculous amount of dedication to understand those debates, that you might as well have just learned the language. I think given the current climate, yeah, that's a reasonable way of navigating it.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you could just learn the language, and that is a shortcut. It's just, I think that shortcut forces you into a side that maybe leads to incorrect conclusions. Not that we're going to make entirely the correct conclusions. I'm just trying to make as few errors as possible, if you will.
I don't think it's inevitable that you have to take a side when learning a language in something like that. But I think it's more likely that you would.
Yeah. I guess that's more knowing thyself / also humans. I mean, once you invest a certain amount of time in something, you tend to not want to budge from that.
Yeah.
It's like a sunk cost kind of thing, but
that's true.
Yeah. Once you've expended that effort, it's like, well, I'm not gonna shift from that. So just a small note on Hebrew. Then another small note I want to make just on, this is an interpretive choice, and it's not that we will look at these stories only through this lens, but I do think the early stories here in the Bible, in Genesis, they give us more of a window into God's motivations that we don't necessarily see with other participants. In part because these are stories that, if we, again, we're not looking at them as necessarily having to be historical, but I think this sort of signals something about the story. If you look at them as being stories God would have had to communicate to man about what had happened, that would kind of be what these stories are, these early stories. And also the way God is presented in these stories is a little more expressive about motivations and those kind of things than we sometimes see in some of the other parts of the Bible. So, and also worthwhile, we don't get much of a window into the other participants in these stories, right? The only really window we get into them is the way they respond to God. We don't get much in terms of their own,
motivations.
Yeah, their own motivations, their own way of thinking, all of those things, right? And so that has led to us, again, reading in motivations on these people, right? And suggesting, we talked about before the idea that when God asks Adam and Eve what happened, we instantly see that as shifting blame, which we don't have to. It's certainly not described there as their motivation. It does sound like a description of what happened. But all those things combined, I think, give us a special, unique opportunity to really look at this as God trying to express to us what he sees when he looks at his creation. Here's a way for me to help you see what I see, right? And in some ways, this becomes particularly important in the Adam and Eve story, because we've talked about the idea that this is almost juvenile, in the way that it presents this, that perhaps, we would appear very juvenile to him, right? All of our sins would appear very juvenile. So the idea that this is a very juvenile look from our perspective, we could, I think, and this is, again, an interpretive choice, but I think one that may be warranted, we could also look at it to say, yeah, as God sees it, all our sins look very juvenile, right? All our excuses, all our reasonings, all of the things we find persuasive from the serpent, all those look incredibly juvenile and simplistic and like, how could you be this dumb, right? From his perspective, that's what he sees when he sees us is, how are you being this dumb, so that's just another small interpretive choice that is not, it's not like the driving way we're going to look at these stories, but it is something just to keep in mind and look for those windows, I guess, into how God is seeing us as a result. All right.
I think that's a proper way to look at it, because otherwise Adam and Eve look very stale and look very, you don't see anything behind the curtain with them. I think that could be a reason for it. It's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah, you see people that are so dumb, there's no personal lesson to take away from it. It turns it into, frankly, that's where you start to get, again, the idea of the story of original sin. Well, this is not a story that can really teach me a lot about my own predilection to sin. It's just, this is how some idiots who were persuaded by incredibly dumb, small arguments found their way to the very first sin. And since then it's gotten more complex or something, but it really limits the personal application that you can take from it. So all right, with that, again, that was a quick one, but that is our last, I think, preview episode. So from here we dive into the beginning of Genesis 2 verse 4, and it'll be a little while before we get to humans. We've got to, the human will be created, I guess, but the actual meat of the story here that we're most familiar with, we've got to first make our way through the description of Eden and why these strange descriptions and why so much detail that often gets overlooked. So we're gonna dive into that. I think there's actually some really fascinating gems in there. So we will be doing that. Make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss that when it comes out. Be sure to comment, leave reviews, whatever is the appropriate version of all those things on your platform. And if you'd like to get a hold of us, send us an email at unschooltheology@protonmail.com, and we will see you soon. Thanks.